Good afternoon, all. This is Jagannath Panda, head of the South Asia and Indo-Pacific Center at the ISDP. Today's webinar is about China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and this is a part of our research project, the Silk Nodes, China's power architecture in South Asia and the Indian Ocean region. As a part of this research project, we are carrying out a number of webinars, which is titled as Silk Cage series. And this particular webinar today will focus about China's influence operations over Pakistan, and particularly the corridor they have been building over the last 1 decade with Pakistan. We know that this corridor is known as a flagship corridor for the Chinese, and they have been investing a lot of finance, lot of energy, lot of strategic endeavors into this project. If we try to analyze this corridor more from the strategic point of view, many see it as an economic corridor, but also a number of other experts, they increasingly seeing this corridor as a strategic, layered, and a long-term initiatives of China to make an inroads into the Indian Ocean regions. So therefore, to me, probably the China-Pakistan economic corridor is not necessarily about roads, ports, and energy projects. If we try to see it more from a strategic and from a broader point of view, it brings together connectivity, security, political influence, maritime access, especially through Gwadar port for the Chinese in the regions. So in that context, I think we need to discuss three particular issues: whether the China-Pakistan economic corridor is really a kind of a developmental oriented corridor, or there is more attached to it. There are scholars who argue that this is simply not a development corridor. It should also be seen as a strategic entrenchment of China. There is also a kind of another debate also among the experts and scholars floats around that the China-Pakistan economic corridor also talks about sovereign partnerships, but also on the other level, it is also seen as a kind of asymmetric dependence if we try to go into the details of this corridor. The third element also that we are going to probably discuss, whether this particular corridor should be seen more as a regional stabilizer, or it should be seen much more than that as a geopolitical stabilizer. So therefore, the moot question here is that each China-Pakistan economic corridor building is a kind of strategy to save Pakistan's future in favor of China, or it is a kind of attempt by the Chinese to lock Pakistan for forever in its strategic orbit. In order to discuss this, we have a fantastic set of experts who have studied about China-Pakistan economic corridor, as well as the regional politics pertaining to South Asia and Indian Ocean. To start with, we have Elizabeth Threlkett. Elizabeth is a senior fellow and director of the South Asia program at the Stimson Center. Her research interest includes nuclear competition in Southern Asia, regional security dynamics, geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific, and also she has been covering China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan regions for quite a long time. Then we have Dr. Joshua White. Joshua is a CV Star Distinguished Professor of Practice at Johns Hopkins SAIS. He is currently an Anderson Scholar at SAIS Europe in Bologna, and serves as a faculty co-lead for the Asia focus area. He has written extensively on Pakistan and also come out with books on such type of topics. Then we have Professor Ajay Darshan Behera. He is the director of MMAJ Academy of International Studies at the Jamia Millia Islamia University, which is a central university based in New Delhi. Until recently, Professor Behera served as the coordinator of its Center for Pakistan Studies, and he has been speaking and writing on Pakistan-related issues and the geopolitics in the regions for a long time. Then we have Dr. Brendan Cannon. Brendan is an associate professor of international security at Khalifa University, Abu Dhabi in UAE. Also, Brendan is an associated senior fellow with ISDP with the Stockholm Center for South Asian and Indo-Pacific Affairs. His research covers the nexus of international relations, security studies, and geopolitics. And Brendan is coming out with an issue brief very soon on the topic. Then we have a Japanese expert who has been covering the South Asian politics for a long time, Mr. Rohei Kasai. He's a visiting associate professor at the Center for South Asian Studies at Gifu Women's University in Japan. Rohei actually has traveled to India, Pakistan quite extensively. Earlier, he has served as a political researcher or as advisor for Japanese embassy in Beijing, New Delhi, and Islamabad. All of their CVs, detailed CVs and profile background is in ISDP website as well as in their respective institutes website. So I would request all of our participants to see our speaker's profile in details in the website. And if you have any comments, please write your comments and questions in the Q&A box. But to start the discussion, I'll start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you have been following the issues quite closely for a couple of decades, if I correctly know. And you have written extensively on the subject, also advising on the subject. I'll start with your opinion about how do you really see the Chinese game plan when it comes to China-Pakistan economic corridor, particularly how the Chinese really try to link it with Xi Jinping's that critical initiative, three key initiatives, particularly with the global security initiatives, and how China-Pakistan economic corridor is closely linked with Chinese foreign policy strategies in the regions. If you could throw some light, that would be interesting, and then we'll move to other speakers. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Jagannath, for having me. It's wonderful to be here and look forward to learning from my fellow panelists this morning, at least here in DC. I think to start with, my sense of where CPEC stands now over a decade after its announcement, it's really important to drill down on what we have and haven't seen from the corridor itself. And happy to go into kind of the expectations versus realities, perhaps on both sides. I will say I focus more on South Asia than I do on Chinese direct foreign policy. So you'll hear more of that inflected in my remarks. As we open the pages, for example, of newspapers in Pakistan over the last couple of months, you'll probably have seen many headlines around CPEC 2.0, a focus on industrialization. It's the 75th anniversary of China-Pakistan relations, which seems to be driving quite a bit of a renewed focus. But in my view, we've seen decidedly mixed outcomes from the first decade of CPEC investments. And I think there are real challenges there that we shouldn't dismiss. And so while yes, going back a decade, this really was branded as a transformational corridor that had clear economic and security imperatives, I think looking now with 10 years of evidence to examine, in some ways, CPEC seems to have been a victim of its own branding success. And I would argue that it has been perhaps a learning opportunity for China as it thinks about how to engage not just in Pakistan, but more broadly as well, right? So at times in conversations with Chinese scholars around CPEC over the years and their broader strategy, you hear a logic that to my ear is kind of grounded in the idea of modernization theory, where what was missing from Pakistan was additional investment, and with concerted effort and the sort of scale of investment and a clear plan, China would be able to help Pakistan become more modern, more moderate. These are the words that tend to come out. And over time, I think what we've seen is actually that Pakistan has been able, for better or worse, to exert quite a bit of agency in shaping how CPEC has and hasn't come to fruition. Getting down to brass tacks, I think where we have seen quite a bit of engagement and effort and really impact is in the power sector. So that has made up the bulk of what we at least know publicly about the inflows coming from China. Here, overall, I think investment really peaked early, and recent annual inflows have been significantly lower. Um, Thinking back, though, 10 years, Pakistan really struggled with widespread power challenges where there was load shedding, there was not consistent power throughout the country. And that was seen as really holding back Pakistan's broader economy, given the challenges that it represented, not just for average Pakistanis, but for industrialization and manufacturing. And CPEC has contributed significantly, adding nearly 10,000 megawatts in projects. The shortages have been reduced, but as part of that, we've also seen significant challenges with contractual disputes, repayment issues for some of those power projects. So, as with all of this, the devil is kind of in the details of, yes, what has been added, but also the friction that has come up along the way. Um, on transportation, there have been major highways that have been upgraded and made operational under CPEC. But for example, I think it's good to look at the ML1 railway project, which was one of kind of the flagship of the flagships, right? Which Pakistan was looking for funding for years, and China really seemed to be dragging its feet. And indeed, late last year, Pakistan ended up appealing to the Asian Development Bank to cover what now seems to be, or at least is projected to be, forward movement on the ML1 railway. And so, in that as well, I think we can see some reticence on China's part to get invested in additional significant hard infrastructure projects along those lines. It sounds like we'll come to water quite a bit going forward, so I'll only touch on it here. A lot is made of water, but when you look at what is and isn't happening there, yes, there's a port, yes, there's an airport, but in terms of cargo volumes that we're seeing thus far, it really is not terribly substantial. I think it's safe to say, and so perhaps more there, thinking about it as latent capacity is a useful frame. What might come down the road, but with all of this, there really are meaningful challenges. And here, I'll just close by highlighting the security situation and what it has meant for Chinese workers, the engineers who have been building these projects. We've seen numerous attacks over the years, and that's really come out as a key source of tension between China and Pakistan. With that, it's also driven, of course, some increased security cooperation as they've done an increased tempo of counterterrorism drills. But nonetheless, that is a very real issue, not least because of the spate of attacks that we've seen in Balochistan over the past several weeks. So, in closing here, I think I would just caution as we draw lessons from CPEC, it feels important to differentiate CPEC itself as a project from the broader China-Pakistan relationship, which I think is a much greater whole that CPEC is only a part of. And here would point to what played out in May in the India-Pakistan crisis and the strong support that China provided to Pakistan in that, the role of Chinese military hardware. So there's a lot more beyond just the CPEC frame, but look forward to diving deeper. I'll leave it there for now.
Excellent. Thank you very much for those initial thoughts. I think I'll go back to your point about making Pakistan modern or carrying out modernization plans within Pakistan. How real is that? Probably we'll come to discuss that when we discuss Gauda in the second round. So I'll leave that point to you to throw some more light. Let's move now quickly to Joshua, who has been writing, published a book almost on Pakistan, delving details into the subject. So Joshua, over to you for 5 minutes.
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here with such a distinguished group on an important topic. Really two things come to mind. Maybe less observations and more arguments. One is that the China-Pakistan economic corridor, in my view, is not a corridor. It doesn't really connect something to something else in the way that corridors definitionally should. It's not really a corridor because, as Elizabeth said very well, the phase one investments from CPEC were focused in the power sector and to some extent on transportation. These were needed investments, relatively successful investments, but they did not, in any meaningful sense, connect Pakistan and China or connect Pakistan to any other country, apart from the realities of the investment flows. If you look at the information that's been put out about the phase two of CPEC, including the recent statement by the joint statement by Xi Jinping and Shehbaz Sharif, the priorities seem to be focused on agriculture, special economic zones, and sort of industrial cooperation and information technology. So we could argue about whether these areas will work, which ones might work better. I have some thoughts on that. None of them are really very connectivity oriented, except possibly on the IT front. So with agriculture, there's a little bit of connectivity in that Pakistan's vegetable and animal exports to China have been slowly increasing over the last few years. So there is sort of more trade happening. But a lot of this really looks like technical support and capacity building within Pakistan by Chinese experts. The special economic zones, industrial partnership, we've been hearing about this for a number of years. It's exceedingly vague. When you ask people, well, what is being produced and where is it going? You get all kinds of very roundabout answers. So again, there could be some, Chinese companies investing in Pakistan for export to the Gulf or other things, but it doesn't look like a corridor, in my view. And then on IT, this is perhaps where we could see the most connectivity. We certainly see a convergence of technology ecosystems in Pakistan using the Chinese tech stack in different ways. That's important. And it could lay the groundwork for other kinds of connectivity, but again, that doesn't look like a corridor to me. So that's the first thing I would say. Not that it's insignificant, but that the forms of investment in the past and the ones that are apparently slated for the next stage of this project don't have that really substantial connectivity element. The second thing I would argue is that CPEC is in fact a platform for influence, but it is not yet a platform for projecting influence, which is to say, we can see how it's a means by which China influences Pakistan, and stands to gain. And there's a mutual gain in that relationship. But I don't yet see it as a platform for China projecting influence because there's not yet sort of CPEC related investments that enable PLA Navy operations in a meaningful way. Because it's not exactly clear what China would want to do in the Indian Ocean region or the Arabian Sea that it can't do without some infrastructure addition by Pakistan. Now, there are a couple areas where we could see more influence projection. One is in the technology area and IT. The other relates to the recently signed Pakistan-Saudi defense deal, where there's some intimation that there could be deeper defense industrial cooperation between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, which would of course implicitly implicate the sort of deep connectivity between China and Pakistani defense industrial bases. Will either of these things change? The corridor that's not really a corridor and the influence, but not the influence projection. They could. And that's why I think it's great to have this kind of conversation. But I think they're unlikely to change quickly because infrastructure happens slowly, investment happens slowly. And we see that, BRI investments by some, recent estimates are quite high right now. There's a lot of BRI investments around the world focusing on energy and minerals. But Pakistan is not getting BRI investments on energy and minerals, right? So we really have to look for the investment patterns. And second, as Elizabeth mentioned, when the domestic security dynamics are moving in the wrong direction, which they certainly are in the profile of incidents targeting Chinese citizens and Chinese workers in Pakistan, and the very, very public Chinese reaction to this at the highest levels, right? When that is happening as the security, as part of the security landscape, it's difficult to think about power projection or about deeper quarter type integration because the security environment stands as a damper on both of those fronts. So I will stop there with my cheerful skepticism on these questions.
No, I must tell you these skepticisms are really well taken, and really interesting point that CPEC is not necessarily a corridor in itself. There is more into it, and second is that it is there are influence games attached to it, but not necessarily CPEC is a platform for projecting influence. I think your points are well taken, and we'll come more details into it, probably discussing Gadar a little bit. How do you really see the defense components emerging out of it? You mentioned about Pakistan-Saudi defense deal. Maybe you could go into the details how CPEC corridor or the Gadar port itself is going to really be a facilitator for China's defense supply chain in times to come. If you could throw some lights on that in the second round, that will be interesting. With this note, now let me invite Professor Behera. Over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jagannath, for this invitation and share this platform with experts on the subject. I don't claim to be an expert on the subject, but I've been observing Pakistan for quite some time. Let me begin by making a statement on the vision and reality of CPEC. I think it made immense sense for both China and Pakistan to have this, whether you debate about the corridor or, whatever terminology you want to use. But that vision for China, that you could bypass the Malacca Strait, which would cut down your, oil supplies to transporting over 12,000 kilometers to about 2,500 kilometers. You could save about $2 billion a year. And the Chinese, of course, as you've been kind of trying to raise this question, there is certainly a security component or strategic component to the whole BRI project. And for the Pakistanis, who've been going through immense economic difficulties since I would say about 2010 onwards, when the resources from the United States started drying up. Obviously, I mean, it was a great attraction, and all of us know that they believed that this is going to be a game changer with the kind of announcements, $56 billion of investment and things like that. But the reality is this, as both Joshua and Elizabeth have pointed out, that it's not panned out in the way probably the imagination had happened. And I think there are reasons for that. The first reason, I think, is one, China doesn't really understand our societies. It doesn't understand Pakistan. China deals with the Pakistani elites. It deals with the state of Pakistan. It doesn't really understand the society of Pakistan. And that is where I think one of the fundamental problems that's come about is how that society has reacted to the BRI. The BRI today, on one side, as Joshua pointed out, that they benefited in some senses in the beginning, and I think they've electricity production and some amount of infrastructure development. They've got new power plants. They've got modern highways, railways. They've got quite a bit of investment. But as Joshua pointed out, I also agree that there has not been that kind of transparency about the whole CPEC project. We still don't know what's the kind of interest Pakistan is paying for the investments that's coming in, for the loans that essentially they have to use. And we still don't know, where exactly are the goods produced and where they're going. But on the other side, the security dimension of CPEC and that's where I'm going to focus a little because to kind of come closer to the question that you've raised, Jagannath, and that is that the security dimensions of this whole thing has become far more complicated than what probably the Chinese envisaged, and what probably even the Pakistanis thought that they could, handle. And on the economic side, again, which we cannot kind of discount or, the gravity of the situation, that 10 years and the Pakistanis are like $30 billion in debt to the Chinese. I don't know how to relate the roughly about $130 billion of debt that the Pakistanis owe various, multilateral funding agencies from outside. It's not going to be easy, and this whole thing is actually put Pakistan in an immense debt crisis. You're basically rolling over the debt. We don't see that kind of production, or we don't see that kind of growth in the economy, where we can visualize that in a short term they would be able to make a transition or a change in their economy. On the security side, it is, I think there is a perception within Pakistan. Initially, there was a problem between states like Punjab and Sindh that, Punjab was kind of cornering all the investments and Sindh was not. And Balochistan is very clear that all the investments that are going into Balochistan is basically extractive. The local population does not believe that there is any benefit to them. The Chinese style of functioning also, where they've not been involving local participants in the projects they're doing. It's not. I don't have the data. Neither have I seen them. What kind of employment the BRI projects have created for the local population, and these are grievances, and these grievances are very clear with the Baluchis that. All the projects are essentially to take over the resources of Balochistan and the Gwadar port, which again, the locals are not allowed inside. There's no local labor being used in the Gwadar port. So the challenge that the Baluch insurgents have posed to the CPEC, I do not know whether the GSI, Global Security Initiative, is linked to that. Because the thing is that, the problems that the Chinese are having with the Pakistanis, and as I said, the Chinese don't understand Pakistan. And the assumption that the Pakistanis can control all this or create the kind of environment in which, the Chinese will have absolutely free go in trying to do whatever they want to do. So they've been insisting on the Pakistanis to provide security to the Chinese engineers, personnel, and there are reports now that the Chinese have basically brought in their own security personnel. There are reports now that the Chinese are using private security forces. I don't know whether in the long term this is going to be sustainable. And one thing that I believe that as long as Balochistan is festering, I don't see that the CPEC is going to succeed much. And this is where the role of Gwadar becomes important because, as pointed out by Joshua, we haven't seen much happening. That thing has been leased from, I think, 2013. They leased it from the Pakistani, but there's no great activity there. There's nothing that's flowing out through Gwadar, or the Chinese are using the so-called corridor to take goods and energy resources to China. So 10 years or 11 years of investments have not really, given them the kind of outputs they must have believed in. And on the other side, the security situation, despite all the dependence, the interlinkages, and what happened during Operation Sindoor, the security situation in Pakistan has essentially deteriorated. I don't know whether the Chinese really have solutions for the Pakistanis. I mean, the Pakistanis also on the other side are being very strategic or careful and hedging. They have not allowed Gwadar to emerge as a naval base. The Chinese are wanting that, but they have not allowed. So the calculus on the Pakistan side that we, have to be careful, because there is one another aspect which I'm not going to dwell on that right now, that the Pakistanis by the end of it cannot be seen to be completely dependent on the Chinese. They will still, I mean, in the recent past, we have seen how they've been trying to reach out to the United States, improve in some sort of improvement in the relationship with the United States, and that is where I don't think so that they will allow that kind of space to the Chinese in Gaza. I'll stop there because I think I've spoken more than 5 minutes, so that we can take more questions.
No, thank you very much. I think those are really valid points, and particularly your initial point about the society point of view, the societal reaction that you mentioned. I think that is something we need to discuss a little further, particularly in the context that how the Pakistani society is becoming over-dependent on the Chinese investments. We'll come back to you in the second region. So in the second round, you could throw more lights on this. But now let me invite Brendan over to you. You are situated in a country and a location which is very close to actually CPEC. So, and I know for a fact that you have been following Gwadar port, but your initial thoughts for 5 minutes about CPEC.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jagannath. It's a pleasure to be here, and really enjoyed listening to the three experts who spoke. And what's fascinating is with the ingredients that all three talked about, link this to so many other BRI projects around the world, but particularly in the Western Indian Ocean region. I follow that rather closely, particularly in East Africa, and the desire of for states like Pakistan or Kenya or Ethiopia for corridors, right? But many of them unviable even after a significant amount of investment has been done. The potential dependency that comes with that, the potential leverage and access that it gives China, but also the potential for things to turn sour between China and the host state. And so I think we're seeing this much more. We're looking now at 13 years since the BRI was unveiled, and it really is a mixed bag all around. That being said, I think I'm going to just strike a decidedly more alarmist tone, and certainly I'm going to pan out a little bit and give us kind of a geopolitical international structure argument to what's going on and what China in particular gets from CPEC, assuming that it ever becomes somewhat viable. So this is not to disparage any of particularly Joshua's comments about this isn't really a corridor. I agree with that completely right now. But CPEC can potentially work as an economic corridor and a strategic instrument because it's built on this very classical geopolitical logic. It is potentially part of this silk cage that this whole seminar is about, that China is constructing across Eurasia and into the Indian Ocean. An architecture of potential connectivity that potentially produces leverage, access, and strategic depth. China's Communist Party and the leadership in particular, they're very astute geopoliticians. They adhere and read the classical school of geopolitics, like Mahan and Mackinder and Spikeman, right? And so while this may have fallen out of favor in Europe and places like that, listen, it never has in Beijing, and thankfully it hasn't in Tokyo and Delhi either. But just to give us some idea of the logic behind the CPEC and Gwadar in particular, if you look at Halford Mackinder's Heartland theory, right, that held that any state or power or group of powers that controls the heartland of Eurasia, inner Eurasia, right? This ill-defined area between the Volga River and Inner Mongolia. You potentially have the resources and strategic depth to then contest potential hegemony globally, because that would give you control, not by conquest, but by other means of both Africa and Eurasia. That's offset by the Dutch-American political scientist Nicholas Spijkman. He flipped that logic. He saw the rimland, or the littoral areas of Eurasia, where sea power, commerce, population, and economic power are concentrated. The logic of his theory was that a state or a combination of states, like India, for example, operating from Eurasia's littorals can maintain an equitable balance of power in Eurasia and thus the world. If you can hold the rimland, you can bottle up heartland. Challenger is the idea. So I think you can see where, obviously, Delhi is extremely concerned about Gwadar for a variety of reasons in CPEC. Not only is it the competition with China itself and its regional competition with Pakistan, but the potential for that to come online does pose a dilemma for them. I think what China's leadership understands today, and what our own geopolitical strategies as like-minded states should reflect, is that, number one, I don't think anybody's going to quibble with this, the Indo-Pacific is now the primary arena where conflict and cooperation are clustering. Now, this shift elevates the Indian Ocean's importance in shaping global distributions of power in a way that it wasn't important, for example, in the Cold War. China remains largely bottled up for now in the Western Pacific, which is why it wants Taiwan so badly. And so it has strong incentives to gain some influence throughout Eurasia, via Central Asia, and Pakistan. Ideally, it would have long-term sustainable access to both the Arabian Sea of the Bay of Bengal, thus surrounding India with this silk noose, as Jagannath has so delightfully put it. And so I think this is where CPEC could become pivotal, right? Beijing would like to mitigate its strategic vulnerabilities, the so-called Malacca dilemma, and a number of others. And so control of approaches matters. So CPEC is an economic corridor in potentially a straightforward sense. It creates a pathway, if it ever comes online, for export, for development, for energy resources from the Gulf where I sit. But it also potentially offers China that strategic leverage. I think what Professor Ajay said, though, is really, really critical here. China doesn't understand Pakistan, just like China doesn't understand so many other places, whether it's Ethiopia or Kenya, et cetera, et cetera. And therein lies a huge problem. It's not this modernization theory that Beijing has, that Elizabeth mentioned, is really in play, I think. And I think, to be fair, Islamabad initially saw this as a real promise, right? And I think there's disappointment on both sides. China really hasn't gotten what it wanted. Pakistan hasn't gotten what it's wanted either. But at the same time, we do have elements of a corridor developing, and we do have a port in Gwadar that's been operational since 2016, albeit, as we'll talk about a bit later, in a rather disappointing sense. I'll leave my comments there, and we'll talk about Gwadar a bit later.
Very useful, Brendan, and thank you very much. I think your point about that some of these CCP officials are astute geopolitics, I completely agree with you. Even though some of them are technocrats, some of them are from legal background, but they do the basics so well in terms of understanding the geography and geopolitics. Hats off to their game plan, the corridor plans they have been executing under the Belt and Road Initiative, even though some of them are critical, not in a very good state of affairs, not been successful, but the attempt to manage the Belt and Road wings, all of those 6 corridors, 3 on the Central Asian corridor side and 3 on the Indian Ocean side, are a really a kind of a very impressive initiative. I must acknowledge that. But with this note, let me invite now to Rohey. Rohey, you have been following about Pakistan issue, India-Pakistan issues very closely, and you have studied about the relations of Pakistan with India so closely. How do you really see CPEC, and particularly when you visited there continuously and there was Japanese investment involved in Pakistan, how Japan also looks at CPEC and the future of Pakistan and future of China-Pakistan relation per se? If you could throw some light.
Okay, thank you, Jagannath, and thank you for inviting me to this wonderful seminar. I'm really excited to join this. Uh, well, um, First of all, when China proposes and advances such a mega project, whether it is a Belt and Road BRI or the Chinese corridor, it's as it advances, it loses its own meaning. For example, like Silk Road. Now China has many Silk Road rights. Silk Road not only on the Eurasia but on the maritime, and it even has the ice Silk Road, or even its Silk Road goes to the space. And I don't think there's any silk in space or in the Arctic. And also the corridor. If you look at CPEC. It's of course they're trying to build it, with the corridor, but yeah, well, I think it is, not really connected fully, and it is kind of a combination or the group of the various infrastructure and other economic projects, and but you know, now it is more than a decade, since this CPEC project started. Uh, you know, when it started as basically the focus was on a bilateral project between China and Pakistan. But now, particularly over the last few years, particularly from the Chinese point of view, China tries to involve the more, outside of the countries and make it more, the multilateral project. And the one is of, the across Arabian Sea, and when trying to, invite and attract, for example, like, Saudi Arabia. And but this is not only the maritime, but if you look at the land, I think last year, China also invited Afghanistan to join CPEC. So so there's, well, no, of course, but the relation between Pakistan and China is, I would say, Pakistan and Afghanistan is not very good. So the possibility of Afghanistan joining CPEC is not really high. But still, the China has, I think, Chinese mind is now, not only making it in China, Pakistan, but also making it more, the diverse, and bringing more countries into this project. And that's in the from the perspective of the partners, and also from the point of the financing, as other colleagues already mentioned. Now under CPEC, now some other international and regional developing banks, particularly the ADB, is they're looking at the one of the some of the project under the CPEC, particularly in MN1. And in the recent news report says that now they are quite close to the deal of the ADB in providing the $2 billion, I think, providing for this the modernization of the railways. So that will also signify that the kind of the new stage of the CPEC. So that is one thing. If it really materializes, that is one thing that we should pay attention to. Okay. And um, but at the same time, from the Pakistan side, of course, Chinese involvement, Chinese participation, and its cooperation in its own, the national development is very necessary, very crucial. But at the same time, I'm sure that they are much aware of the issue of debt. They are also afraid of being falling into the debt trap. And of course, in China is also aware of that, because it's now China is often criticized by many countries that now they are providing the assistance and the financial project, but eventually they will they're trying to bring those countries into the debt of the trap of debt. Uh, but and particularly if you compare, there's also the failure case in Sri Lanka. You know, the but the amount of the debt is much larger in the case of Pakistan. So, the repayment may start in the about 10 years later or 15 years later, but in Pakistan in the future may face a very serious issue of a repayment. And well, at the time, I don't know what kind of the economic situation Pakistan will be, but well, that will be the very crucial issue in the coming years, I believe. And if I may add, in the Japanese perspective, well, Japan used to be one of the largest aid provider to Pakistan. As Chinese presence increases particularly over the last decade, with Japanese assistance and economic aid to Pakistan, if you compare them, I think the Japanese ODA's focus in South Asia now completely shifted to India and Bangladesh. And now Japanese ODA to Pakistan is now, relatively small size and focusing on not really the economic mega project, but projects such as the humanitarian or in the sector such as the education and health, such as the polio eradication. So Japan is still quite active in the development assisting the development of Pakistan. But I must say that the Japanese, the role and activities, more limited compared with, the 10 years before and 20 years before. So that is the kind of the overall situation of the Japanese involvement in the country. So I will stop here and I will go back. I will speak more about the Guadal in the next round. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Rohi. I think those are both very interesting points from Japanese point of view. I think a couple of points which is emerging out of this is that Pakistan is definitely becoming much more dependent on China on some of these investment packages, particularly on roads, railways and infrastructural developmental programs and all. So that leads me to a bigger question. And if we gather into it, that leads me to a bigger question. And I'll start with Joshua, inviting your comments. And already there are a couple of comments in the Q&A box for you already. This is from Tristan Eng. Tristan used to be with ISDP as an intern. Now he will be very soon joining as an associated junior fellow. So you could look at his question and probably address coupling with my comments. One is about the client state phenomena. Can we really say that Pakistan, if we take into consideration the huge Chinese investment over the last 1 decade and coupled it with the China strategic game plan, military game plan through Gadar to the Indian Ocean, can we say that Pakistan is just a client state for China or much more than that? Second, this also leads me to ask, to what extent the strategic autonomy of Pakistan has been affected over the last 1 decade. Of course, Pakistan, there has not been regime stability. Military had a larger say in Pakistan's politics, domestic politics and foreign policy. So to that extent, after you, probably I'll come to Professor Behera, that how the strategic autonomy of Pakistan is getting affected and how much China is responsible for that. We'll start with you, Joshua, then Professor Behera, then Elizabeth, then Brendan and Rohi. Yeah, over to you, Joe.
It's a great question. I'll start with this big picture and then maybe narrow down to Gwadar. How is Pakistan's strategic autonomy doing? It's doing great. I mean, Pakistan has deep ties with China, not just the BRI that we've been talking about, but deep intelligence and security ties that are, presumably, I think it's reason to believe, getting deeper. They have somehow rekindled a relationship with the United States, in part by presenting a beautiful box of critical minerals, supposedly critical minerals, to President Trump. They have forged a fairly explicit defense partnership with Saudi Arabia. They're engaging with Turkey. Whether any of us would have predicted this sort of autonomous room for maneuver, as it were, a year or two ago is another question. But I think Pakistan is demonstrating its own kind of strategic autonomy. which if you're a Pakistani strategist, I think is welcome. The defense industrial piece is another element of this. We will see what happens with the Pakistan-Saudi arrangement and whether there is a defense industrial element there. But in partnership with China, Pakistan, may be emerging as a relatively capable niche exporter, sort of a lower middle tier defense exporter, in a way that is interesting, drawing on its sort of industrial partnerships with Pakistan. I don't think that the actual infrastructure that China is providing, ports and so forth, are particularly helpful toward that effort, but it is interesting. Now, one of the reasons why Pakistan is able to exercise this strategic autonomy is, I think, because it has a relationship with China that is relatively predictable and relatively stable, but not highly exclusive. And if we just survey the relatively unimpressive array of things that seem to constitute CPEC Volume 2, Phase 2, Round 2. And in some ways that's a negative for Pakistan. It's not clear what the deliverable is, but in other ways, the fact that there's not a massive strategic port or something gives Pakistan rather room for maneuver. And then I think this brings us to Gwadar. If you think about, what could Gwadar have been? It could have been, or it could still be, a compelling strategic military asset, or it could be or a compelling strategic economic asset. It has not proven to be a compelling military asset because, hey, the PLA Navy can already use Karachi, right? And the infrastructure is not great, and the security issues. Like, there are a lot of reasons why it doesn't feel compelling, at least yet, on the strategic front. On the economic front, if you look at where Gwadar is, this was always going to be difficult. There's no water, there's not fresh water and so forth. The connectivity, the government has had to resort in the last year to highly inefficient market-making mechanisms, which is to direct federal entities to start shipping stuff in and out of Gwadar. And even after that, the data seems quite underwhelming. So neither of these logics seem very compelling. My own highly quantitative and rigorous analysis is based on the number of text messages I've been getting over the last 10 years from property firms that are trying to sell me a luxury apartment in Gwadar. I used to get them weekly, and then it began to taper off. Since late 2002, it's been fairly quiet. And if you go to the websites of some of these firms, all of the beautiful plans, the lush lawns and the swimming pools are all frozen around circa 2022, 2023. So clearly, even the sort of highly inefficient government incentivized sort of like public sector push hasn't really paid off. Now, look, even if it's not a military port, there are ways that this could be useful to China in a strategic sense, right? And I've written about this. I did a paper for Brookings that looked at some of this. Yes, you can use Chinese ownership and management of ports for intelligence collection. You can pre-position materials. You can take advantage of secure communications networks and listening facilities. If you're in a shooting war, you really want to have good hospitals and access for medical equipment. So, I mean, there are ways that this could be done. It is harder to conceal that kind of dual use function in a port that is not regularly receiving ships, right? It's just much more obvious that it is serving some alternative function. So I'm not saying that the current situation is static, but when you have the economic logic not playing out and the defense logic is not fully baked because of the PLAN's persistent access to Karachi, then I really think there has to be sort of a longer horizon. And the final thing I'll say is that I do think water is important for Pakistan because it is sort of the flagship Chinese investment at the moment, right? And I think Pakistan really has to worry about the narrowing of Chinese interest and investment. As I said, BRI globally seems to be doing quite well, especially in minerals and energy. And Pakistan is getting some construction work, but no sort of fresh investments in those areas over the last year, energy and metal. So there really is a risk that Pakistan sort of becomes, to use the American expression, small potatoes. And it's interesting if you look at the Xi Jinping, Shehbaz Sharif joint statement, the sort of long document they produced, it actually talks about investing in CPEC projects that are, quote, small and beautiful. And I think in other occasions, Chinese officials have talked about small yet beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And there's this sense of wanting things to be visible, wanting the Chinese effort to be visible in Pakistan. But it's almost like they're sort of trying too hard to justify the lack of visible investment. And for that reason, I think water still really sits at the center of the kind of strategic investment question, because it is visible in a time when a lot of the other Chinese projects, IT, agriculture, special investment zones, are not visible in the way that they need to be for political sustainability.
Brilliant points, and I think those are interesting points. We'll have more comments from other panelists, but I do agree that I think on two sectors, energy and metals, probably Pakistan is not really rewarded the way it should be. So that's a valid point to take note of. Professor Beera, over to you for 5 minutes.
Okay, the question of Pakistan's strategic autonomy, I have a different perspective entirely. I don't think so. Pakistan has strategic autonomy, and it has never looked for strategic autonomy. I mean, if you see their strategy, because of the power balancing it needs to do with India, it needs external powers. It is always inviting external powers into the region because of its problems in Kashmir and even otherwise. It's been a willing partner of the West, being part of the Cold War alliances. It only became a part of the non-aligned movement very, very late. So for strategic reasons, Pakistan needs other powers, It cannot, because, by the end of it, the main security challenge Pakistan has is India. And it cannot deal with India on its own. It needs partners, and for that reason, for various reasons, in the way the Cold War panned out, it was a willing partner, and I've labeled it as as the frontline state syndrome, that it is willing to become the frontline state for other powers for their security interests. And that is something which, the Pakistanis themselves have been lamenting, including their defense minister speaking about it in the parliament in the recent past, about how they've been used by the United States and thrown away as tissue paper or something like that. Now, that's logical. I mean, given in a state which does not have comparable power, it's logical for that state to do that. And that is also the reason why I think, it's always been looking for partners. So if once it got isolated or was kind of, became unimportant in the strategic calculus of the United States, its relationship with China increased and realized that the benefits that they had from the United States. One significant difference between the kind of economic benefits that Pakistan got from the United States, the kind of aid they got, more than 32 billion over a period of time, and the kind of economic benefits they get from China is very different. They're not aid. Everything is a loan, but they have become willing partners of the Chinese, and that's the reason why I think the idea of strategic autonomy for Pakistan does not kind of matter, because they need the Chinese. They are very clear that in the Operation Sindoor, they benefited from their alliance, whatever with the Chinese, essentially exposing the kind of integration they've had with the Chinese in the recent past in intelligence sharing and interoperability operability, etc., etc. So that is not the issue, and they've been willing to kind of give it. So I wouldn't label it as a client state, because even in this relationship with China, what we see is that they have been kind of trying to hedge. They've been trying to not succumb to all the Chinese demands. They've been by not allowing a Chinese military presence in Gwadar. I mean, whatever literature we see suggests that the Chinese haven't been able to transform Gwadar as a naval base. That's important. And but on the other side, they've also kind of succumbed on various things which is to Pakistan, and I think affect in a very adverse. So this question you asked me earlier about the societal thing, like how CPEC has impacted Pakistan society. The perception of a lot of people about the CPEC is that it's not benefiting Pakistan. It's essentially benefiting a very small elite in Pakistan, and obviously also a small elite in China. And the kind of corruption that has happened with many of the CPEC projects, which goes to show that the elite stands to make money out of the project, and the country is running into debt. So obviously there is a very negative impression about the CPEC projects. It also, on the security side, it also shows that the Pakistanis have to give much more priority to Chinese interests in Pakistan. The Pakistanis cannot deal with the problem of terrorism themselves, but there is immense pressure on the Pakistanis to deal with the problem of terrorism against the Chinese, and they have had to create these dedicated forces, called the SSD, Special Security Division, for the protection of the Chinese, special treatment. They have had a naval task force also to protection of Gwadar, and the GSI. They have willingly accepted GSI. Whether I see GSI as more, it has societal implications. It has societal implications in the sense that it is about control. It is about how you control these societies. That is one of the objectives of the GSI, which is not really about geopolitics, but how to deal with these challenges, problems of terrorism and all. And the Chinese have very different ways of dealing with terrorism. And one of the reasons why Pakistan is important to the Chinese is the Xinjiang issue. So it is the Pakistanis have been compromised on that. I mean, they can speak about all kinds of atrocities against Muslims all over the world, but there's not a single word that the Pakistanis can speak up on the Uyghurs or the suppression of the Uyghurs in India. So in a way, the Pakistanis in a bit of a bind, and they're increasingly becoming dependent on the Chinese for various reasons. In the recent past, it just goes to show that it's something that they're not, are not happy about. And that's the reason why they're kind of reaching out to the United States and other powers. And we saw that they tried to do the Russians, the Americans, and so. So let me stop there, Jagannath.
Yeah. No, thank you. Useful points. Elizabeth, over to you. Your thoughts about strategic autonomy and some of the other issues.
Yeah, would largely echo what Josh had shared earlier, just in terms of what a remarkable turnaround we've seen in Pakistan over the last year or so. And I do think particularly in kind of 2023, 2024, when we were really starting to see quite unusual public pressure from the highest levels in China's government on security issues in Pakistan, when Pakistan was not getting the time of day in Washington with the Biden administration. Um, it felt like Pakistan's options had really winnowed in ways that were going to be challenging over the long term. Uh, what maybe is also important to bring out here is I think actually it also serves China's interests in some ways to have Pakistan uh, again in a better position with other partners, right? Not pushing that too far. I think you can imagine there would be a point at which Beijing could be concerned about some particular activities that Pakistan could be undertaking with the US. There's always at least curiosity, if not some trepidation about what's happening on the security front. I think that tends to be a bit overblown. But from China's perspective, it doesn't want to be left holding the bag here, right? And given the dependency and the debt issues, I think there is a benefit for China of having Pakistan more broadly integrating and having some options, even if that does give it slightly more agency in some of these negotiations. And so, overall, I think Pakistan is much better positioned now. There is a question of how long term that is going to be, right? Is this sustainable? And I think that is perhaps a separate conversation that we could have, but nonetheless an important one. But seemingly for at least the short to medium term, Pakistan's prospects in its foreign partnerships are on the upswing. Here, though, I really do want to reemphasize the very real security challenges that are playing out within Pakistan, particularly in the western border regions, in Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship is in turmoil right now. And so when you think about what that does for Pakistan's long-term prospects and maybe Brendan, what you were alluding to in terms of just kind of the strategic logic for a lot of these things. If you pull out a map and look at it, it makes all the sense in the world until the rubber meets the road on some of these challenges, and it can start looking a bit more, Ajay, as you were mentioning, like perhaps a vulnerability for Pakistan to have to deploy forces as it has and defend some of these major investments and installations in parts of the country that are incredibly difficult to do so in. I thought it was quite striking, the optics when the much ballyhooed Gwadar Airport finally opened. The ribbon cutting ceremony happened virtually from Islamabad, right? This was not something that Pakistan's leaders were able to travel to Gwadar to inaugurate in person. And while that might have been attributed to scheduling conflicts and the like, I think the visuals there were pretty striking. And going forward, as we think about what that means, Jagannath, getting to your second question of, is Pakistan a client state for China and all of this? I think the reality is much more complex, and perhaps would end with a great point that my colleague Dan Markey makes in the opening of one of his books on the origin of the Gwadar project. And, we tend to associate Gwadar with CPEC, but it was actually something that President Musharraf had pitched to the Chinese back in the early 2000s, coming out of the Kargil crisis as a way of insulating Pakistan from the risk that India could conduct a blockade of the port of Karachi, and also a way of giving Pakistan options to hold at risk India's oil imports from the Middle East. And the Chinese were so taken aback by the idea of this port project. They couldn't quite believe that, what Pakistan was selling. But lo and behold, down the road, when the strategic logic on the Chinese side met with what Pakistan was pitching, we saw it move forward. But there's been, I think we can see in that even though it is possible and understandable how states like India would want to guard against these kind of latent capacities that water and the broader project could represent. I think there are many more challenges there than upsides for the moment.
No, interesting point, and I think about the client state, what you said is also very valid. The reality is much more complex than what it looks like. So I'll invite, maybe before coming to you, Brendan, to comment more elaboratively on Gadar and how Pakistan is seen as a client state, or as Elizabeth mentioned, the reality is much more complex than what it looks like. Rohi, to you, maybe you could share some Japanese perspective. How do you really see the strategic autonomy of Pakistan getting affected over the last a decade or so, particularly given the Chinese influence operations, the investment patterns, and the kind of activities that the Chinese are building in Pakistan and in the neighboring regions? How do you really see that?
Okay, thank you, Jagannath. Well, as far as the strategic autonomy is concerned, I don't think that in Pakistan has strategic autonomy, but Pakistan is very good at making itself look like very strategically significant state. And well, this is significant in the port of Gwadar development. Like Elizabeth has just mentioned that even before China started looking at Gwadar, it was Pervez Musharraf that who has started looking at this the potential of this port. And well, in a way, over the different leaders in Pakistan, they were quite successful in selling the Gwadar to the China, and also the making the country look like very strategically important. And well, but at the same time, on the ground, it is often pointed out, but the Gwadar has various issues to be addressed, including the issue of the fresh water and the issue of the connectivity, the road network. Of course, while it is strategically located, not much in the west of the Karachi, but it also means that it is quite far from the major cities in Pakistan. So how they will connect the Gwadar and the inland major cities in Pakistan, well, that will be there and another very important issue, I think. And well, another point I would like to make.
It looks like,
Yeah.
yeah, Rohi,
Yeah.
are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, right. And another point I think it is quite important to understand the potential of the Gwadar is that we can understand Gwadar by looking at two other ports nearby. And the one is Chabahar port in Iran. And worked on the develop Chabahar, but situation in Iran is worsening, and well, in a way, the Chabahar has losing its the importance because it is very difficult for India, for any other countries to work on this project, and well, and it in turn it increases its the relevance and also significance of the Gwadar port, I guess. Of course, although the purposes of the Gwadar port and the Chabahar port are different, but if you compare with the two ports, now the Gwadar port is getting more significance. And another one is that another port in Pakistan, and that is quite close to Gwadar, that's in Pasni port. And now that in Pakistan, particularly from the last year, the Pakistan is trying to make the passport more attractive. Focusing on its potential and possibility that that will be the export port of the critical minerals reserved in mines in Balochistan. And there are several reports that now U.S. is now looking at the possibility of the passing port and also the developing the critical minerals reserves in Balochistan. So now by doing that, I think that not only looking at looking at the Guadalajara port is not enough. I think we need to position it in the larger perspective. And one is in the connection in comparison with the Chabahar. The other one is the kind of domestic in comparison in Pakistan, and that is in the Guadalajara port and passing port. So that will be the kind of crucial topic in the coming years, I think.
Yeah, no, thank you. Excellent points, and I think your comparison about Chabahar and Pasni port is really valid in the context of our discussion. Brendan, so Rohi has given enough for you to comment and take it forward to comment on the other. Yeah.
Well, I have more than enough from the other panelists as well. Some really, really good comments here. I'm going to classify Pakistan as a classic client state. Look, client states, just because they have that designation doesn't mean that they don't have a good deal of autonomy and sovereignty when it comes to decision making and dealing with other partners. Think of Egypt during the Cold War, flipping sides. Think of Syria during the Cold War. Think of Saddam's Iraq. This is kind of the nature of the beast here. And so even when states, great powers have smaller states in their clutches, so to speak, that's really never been the case. And so I think we should couch Pakistan's moves towards the United States is very opportunistic, knowing who's in the White House right now, the whole Nobel Peace Prize aspect of that, classic move by Islamabad here, but also the Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan tie-up should be looked at in this fashion. Those states cannot give Pakistan what China does. So this is a very, very different type of agreement, and it's anybody's guess whether this will actually materialize. There's a lot that separates these three states from one another, and so that's going to be interesting to look at. I think building on what Elizabeth's riff on my comments initially, yeah, to Beijing and particularly the Xi Jinping administration, it all looked so good on the map, right? There's this idea that if you build it, they will come. We saw this with Hambantota, with Gwadar. There's a port in Tanzania that's they've kind of kicked the can down the road again. There's the Indian Ocean basin is full of these projects, and yet Gwadar, in many respects, when China actually bought into this, it was perfect for Islamabad. Not only was this pitched by Musharraf, but it was talked about back in the 1960s in Karachi and Islamabad as a way to give Pakistan that strategic depth that it feels it needs with India. Now, the interesting thing is that according to what I've read on this, and I'm no Pakistan expert, but the Pakistani Army and Navy haven't capitalized on Gwadar any more than China has. I think there's PNS Akram is the only group or contingent or ship that they have there. And so it's really, really underutilized, not only in a strategic military sense, but also in that economic sense. And so with Rioje's comments about Pasni, and I think that's what you said, the potential to use that as another port, that's very, very interesting, because maybe Pakistan, given the problems in Baluchistan, just understands that this is never going to be viable. And yet here we have port infrastructure, and like so many other ports with infrastructure, in the Indian Ocean basin, it does have potential utility. And so whether that's Duqm in Oman, whether that's Berbera in Somaliland, these things do have some commonalities here, and they can be utilized. China, again, what little I know about China, it does think really long term. It's also playing copycat with other states that have had global power and influence before it, right? And so it sees kind of lily pad basing of the United States. It sees the coaling stations that Great Britain had, right, way back 120 years ago. So it's not making this up on its own, so to speak. It's trying to reproduce something. And I think again, this is where it all looks so good on the map. But the reality is that all of these places, not just Pakistan, but everywhere BRI projects are ongoing, they're highly complex places and very, very difficult to get things done. And these states maintain a huge degree of autonomy when it comes to it. Thanks.
No, thank you. Those are really brilliant points. We have roughly around 20 to 25 minutes now. So we'll have one more round and take the comments and questions from the participants. Before I read those questions from participants, each one of you, I think most of you, in fact, mentioned about Balochistan. I think that is a interesting point to discuss. And I think in our project, we are also discussing and examining how much regime influence is happening through these projects, through this port investment and investment in different sectors. One aspect which is also very critical to look at when it comes to China-Pakistan, when it comes to Gadar port, when it comes to also the Balochistan insurgency, how much there is a chemistry or a kind of a regime influence is there from PLA over ISI or PLA over the Pakistan army, and how is it really linked with the Gadar port and the CPEC when it comes to the security dynamics? If you could comment on those issues, that would be very interesting. And also, let's take these comments from Seville. Seville is with ISDP, and she asks, does the securitization of economic corridors like CPEC signals a broader transformation in how connectivity projects function in international order, potentially normalizing infrastructure as a tool of coercive influence rather than cooperation? So that's an interesting question. So you could, look at these questions and comment on it. And also let me, even though Joshua, you kind of alluded to this question earlier that Tristan asked, let me read this question again and try to pose it to other panelists also. How is China likely to view growing Turkish defense cooperation with Pakistan, including possible Pakistan-Turkey-Saudi security arrangements, given potential tensions between China and Turkey? And could CPEC be used as a leverage to shape Pakistan's bilateral or trilateral partnerships? This is an interesting question, of course, very complicated to comment probably, but very interesting question. And therefore, I would also invite your comments to share your ideas. Where does these 3-4 countries, Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, really factor in the China-Pakistan economic corridor chemistry? Who are these countries you would like to prioritize, both from the Chinese side and for the Pakistani side, to really look for a better trilateral or quadrilateral kind of arrangement in the regions? If you could comment, you are free to comment on some of these issues. You could also ignore. But I'll start in the same order that we started. Maybe Elizabeth first, then Joshua, then Professor Behera, then Brendan, and we'll end with Rohit. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Sure. A lot on the table there. So I'll do my best to pick and choose. So I think coming back to this issue of Balochistan, which I and others have mentioned several times, there is a very active insurgency in Balochistan, and it merits a separate conversation or two. So we're certainly not going to do it justice today. But part of those dynamics are frustrations and tensions among local citizens of Balochistan who feel that Pakistan's central government, Pakistan's military, Pakistan's elites are seeking to extract resources from the province without fully involving the people of the province or ensuring that those benefits actually redound to the people of Balochistan. And that, I think, is exacerbated, to be sure, by talk of extracting critical minerals and investments that are not seen as bringing the benefits to local populations that we heard about perhaps in the early days of CPEC. You know, the talk of jobs and development and modernization and all of this. CPEC targets are also, or CPEC projects are also significant targets for groups like the BLA because of the international headlines that they bring, and particularly the presence of Chinese nationals, Chinese engineers, and we see that play out over time. And so those challenges, and particularly thinking about to Josh's point, you know, the lack of an actual corridor here, when we think about the transportation links, setting aside perhaps CPEC itself and reflecting more on Pakistan's broader ambitions with China and other players, so much of the resources that it seeks to extract are in places that are conflict affected. And thinking about the connectivity and the infrastructure that is required to be able to leverage those resources, it's really challenging to imagine in the current moment that being a sustainable practice. I think one example here, though it is certainly not one that's directly relevant to mineral extraction, but you look at road and rail infrastructure and the extent to which it has been targeted in the insurgency in Balochistan over the last year. The Jaffa Express, for example, a train that connects Quetta and Peshawar, has come under attack at this point dozens of times. And you can imagine going forward, it will be a significant challenge if Pakistan gets to the point that some of the industries that it's hoping to build, be it through critical mineral extraction or special economic zones that we haven't talked very much about, it will be very difficult to ensure security and sustainable security at a reasonable price for the state, for the military, to be able to offer protection for those industries. And so I think there, unfortunately, some of the very dynamics of these projects and the ways that they have been sold actually can worsen those issues, if not directly addressed. And that feels to me like a longer term challenge that certainly Pakistan has not found its way through yet. Just last thing I'll say briefly here and again is the importance of separating out kind of CPEC itself from the broader China-Pakistan relationship, because I think there are slightly different stories to be told there. And on the question of Pakistan-Turkey defense cooperation, Pakistan-Saudi, and whether that could lead to an expansion of CPEC. You know, I'm not holding my breath for that to happen. We've heard a lot about Afghanistan joining CPEC. For a while, we heard about Iran was also mentioned. My sense, and you know, could certainly be proven wrong, is that that cooperation perhaps is happening more in strictly defense realms, right? We're seeing a lot about defense exports of the GF-17s, for example, after the May crisis. And I wouldn't imagine that that would necessarily be tied to CPEC as itself, as we're seeing the second phase come out. But I'll leave it there. Thanks again for a great discussion, Jagannath.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Very useful comments. Joshua, over to you.
Sure. Look, I'll just make three comments on three of the topics you mentioned. First, on this question of the defense ties with Turkey. Um, I think the Pakistan-Turkey defense industrial relationship is just going to have a different incentive structure than the Pakistan-China defense industrial cooperation. With China, there's a real logic of sort of strategic and production mutuality in that they can sort of co-produce the JF-17. Pakistan can export it to countries that might not buy directly from China, but will buy something from Pakistan. This builds interoperability between the forces in a way that allows Pakistan to complicate life for India when there's a conflict with China, or vice versa, right? So that there are a number of sort of positive spillover effects. With Turkey, it's a more commercial relationship, and the nature of the Turkish industrial base is like highly politicized, sort of with certain elite power centers. And the Turkish drones and loitering munitions didn't seem to work very well last spring. So, I mean, there's sort of a number of reasons why that might not have the same sort of deeper resonance that we see with the China-Pakistan defense ties, but that'll be something to look at. On the question of intelligence, the answer to all questions about intelligence is I don't know, at least in a forum like this. But I do think it's entirely reasonable to think that China and Pakistan are spending a lot of time deepening their intelligence ties and their intelligence liaison. But it's also quite possible that they're spending most of that time working on protecting their projects, doing mapping of militant networks in Balochistan, figuring out whether any of those networks have active connection to Xinjiang or Uyghur groups, right? Not intelligence collection for the purposes of power projection, right? Now, of course, they're probably also thinking about maritime surveillance and so forth. And not that they can't do both at the same time, but all this to say that the Chinese investments in Pakistan have a sort of negative draw in that they've been drawing protests and militant groups in a complex security environment. And that takes a lot of energy bilaterally between the two countries. And it's clear, even from the official statements, that this has been a major preoccupation in the relationship. And I have to assume that in the intelligence realm, I mean, they're probably distracted and probably not spending as much time thinking about tracking Indian ships and so forth, because they have this other sort of complicating factor. Third thing I'll say, and so there's a very good question in the Q&A about the securitization of corridors and sort of the securitization of aid. And I think it's an excellent question. If you turn back the clock to the first Trump administration, one of the things that I think the first Trump administration was very effective at doing, whether you agree that this was a good idea or not, they were very effective at the debt trap diplomacy branding. Part of branding is saying the same thing again and again, like 1,000 times, and eventually it sticks. And they went around talking about the manifest risk of Chinese investment that would entrap countries in debt that China could then use for strategic leverage and military purposes. And I think that whether or not that was true in every case, or even in most cases, they succeeded in scaring small countries around the world from taking Chinese money and Chinese investment. And that had an effect on sort of the perceived securitization. People began to look for securitization when it wasn't there, but countries also began to fear securitization, whether or not it was likely to materialize from investment. And I think that narrative has an overhang, and that narrative has persistence. And so, if I were China, I would be thinking, we probably don't really need a base at Guadalajara. Lots of countries do lots of things with access arrangements and visits and other things short of basing, because there's already a huge and growing sensitivity to the securitization of infrastructure. And so regardless of whether you thought Pompeo was correct about this or not, I think that discourse has shaped on the receiving side how countries think about accepting aid, including Pakistan. And I think it helps to explain the recent China-Pakistan high-level statement is centered on the 5 E's, but they're actually 7. I don't know why it's 5. Exports, Pakistan, environment, energy, equity, ethics, and empowerment, right? This is them saying this is the least securitized partnership you've ever seen, right? And I think so on the recipient side, it's shaping that, but I think also on the donor side, it's making countries conscious about how to do investment and how to try to achieve security ends without things that look like securitization. And so that's I think just an interesting area to watch, and particularly true when any base that you make is going to draw the ire of militants and is going to sort of perpetuate the cycle of this being sort of a new distraction in the bilateral relationship. So watch that space.
Excellent, Joshua, as always. Professor Bihara, over to you. You are muted.
I'm sorry, I hope I'm audible now.
Yes.
So the simple answer to the question of securitization of economic corridors is that it's not necessary that it has to be securitized. But in this region, Pakistan, Afghanistan, there should have been an anticipation that these corridors will get securitized. I mean, Pakistan has not been politically stable. Pakistan has had immense, security challenges internally. And the Baluch problem has not been something which is just emanated now. I mean, there have been phases of the Baluch insurgency historically. And very clearly, there is a certain narrative about the Baluch insurgency, which is essentially against the Pakistani Punjabi elites exploiting Baluchistan. Now, the reason why the Chinese are under attack not only by the Baluch, but also by the TTP, is that for different reasons. So the Baluch, because they see the Chinese as using the Pakistani elites to further exploit Baluchistan. The Pakistanis believing that once this corridor comes up, it'll kind of lead to development in Baluchistan. But on the ground, that does not show. On the ground, it does not show that there is any direct benefit that is going to the people of Baluchistan. And obviously, I mean, the Baluch see the Pakistani political elite trying to use the Chinese to exploit Baluchistan, and that is the reason why the Baluch will keep on targeting the Chinese. So we've had several attacks on the Chinese in the last 3-4 years, and this is where the difference in counterinsurgency mechanisms between countries like Pakistan, India, and the Chinese. The Chinese don't understand the complexities of insurgency. I don't think so. They have dealt with the problem. I mean, you just can't fight insurgencies by just simply military force. And ironically, Pakistan also does the same thing. That they have to deal with the Baluch insurgents or groups like the TTP, which may not be amenable to any kind of negotiations. And coming back to the TTP, I mean, the reason why the TTP again is targeting the Chinese is because they believe that the Chinese are propping up, illegal state, or the Chinese are coming in the way of the TTP in unseating the political elites from the seat of power. So as long as these insurgencies which continue, the CPEC will have problems. They cannot. I mean, you can keep on building your infrastructure, but I don't think so. It'll be used for its optimum use. It'll have constant security challenges, and that is increasingly getting more and more complicated by the Chinese insisting that they want to play a role in providing security, which the Pakistanis have registered so far by not agreeing to Chinese presence. But reports say that the Chinese military personnel are already kind of guarding certain of their coal mines, protecting their people. Private security companies, Chinese private security companies, have started operating from Pakistan. So this is going to get more and more complicated, where issues of sovereignty will also come up in the context of Pakistan. Where it also provides greater targets to the Baluchis. So in a way, I think things can flare up. The more direct involvement of Chinese in the security within Pakistan might be, a bigger motivator to the Baluch to actually directly attack the Chinese more. So I am very skeptical that in the short term, or as things stand today, the Pakistanis have good solutions to the kind of threats they're facing to the CPEC corridor. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Very useful comments. Brendan, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think that this separating CPEC with the wider, the bigger China-Pakistan relationship, as Elizabeth said, is helpful. I think this is, in some respects, a marriage of convenience. I don't know how much synergy there really is between Beijing and Islamabad. A lot of this has to do with India. A lot of this has to do with the geopolitics of the region. And so, they're in this relationship for what each of them can get out of this. And this is no different from many other relationships around the world between states. But there is something here for China, very clearly. Having some kind of backdoor access through to the Indian Ocean makes sense, again, from a strategic aspect, and also geoeconomically, geopolitically. The reality of it is a different story, as we've talked about, but that still is a rationale for this. The rationale for Pakistan here is the infrastructure development, the technology aspect of it, the defense industry aspect of it, which Joshua talked about, right? Especially in the infrastructure and development with the BRI, Pakistan is engaging with China because, like so many other countries do, because nobody else is going to build this stuff for them. Let's be very honest here. And so that's a key and critical thing here. The hope for Gwadar is to become a viable port, either for Pakistan or for China, for the PLA Navy, is at this point completely aspirational, and the realities on the ground don't really add up there. Final point I want to make is just going back to this securitization of infrastructure. Yes, the literature on critical dual-use infrastructure, some of which I've written, admittedly, is very, very lengthy. And it's everything from undersea cables to port infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And we've really seen this mushroom over the past 10, 13 years after the onset of BRI. And it's almost unavoidable now. What this panel has brought out so clearly is that there's the potential for this to be used as for strategic purposes beyond the economic motivations, if there were any in the first place. But the reality is that that often these things just don't pan out the way anybody plans them. So thank you very much. Very, very interesting panel.
Thank you, Brendan. Roy, your last thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Jagannath. Well, so since there are so many questions, but I'm afraid I can't cover all of them. But let me make 3 comments, 3 points. One is about the Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. And well, I noticed that these all the three countries have participated in the Board of Peace initiated by President Trump. So I am interested in the diplomatic the aspect, and I wonder if they will have any kind of coordinated stance toward the achieving peace in Gaza, when what kind of the stand they will take. So that's one thing to see, I think. And and then if you look at the Pakistan in the foreign policy, not only looking at the these the countries in the West, but I mean the West Asia, but we also need to look at the look east. And that means not looking India, but then looking beyond India. So in a way, it's Pakistan's look east policy. And well, particularly since in 2024, in August, Pakistan started improving its ties with Bangladesh, and now in Bangladesh, now they have had a new government, BNP government led by Tariq Rahman. So, well, it's quite likely that the Bangladesh and Pakistan will build a stronger relationship. So, we need to understand, we need to think about what kind of impact it will bring about, not only these in two countries, but also in South Asia as a whole. And well, not only South Asia, but also the Pakistan. I think the Shehbaz Sharif visited Malaysia in October last year. And so these, the Pakistan's outreach to the South Asia and as well as in the Southeast Asia. So these eastward engagement is another area that we should keep, we should watch in the coming years. And well, the second point is that the Balochistan. Well, it's since the fact that there are so many.
1 minute, please.
Yeah, yeah. There are so many insurgencies in Balochistan, so that is a reflection that the local people increasingly feeling that these development projects are not not for them. It's like for Pakistan's government or even for China. So they are feeling that they are isolated. They are not the beneficiary of these projects. So that is another question that both Pakistan and China will face in the coming. Well, of course they are already facing it, but it will be increasingly important issue in the years to come. And well, I don't think if any other colleagues have mentioned, but the relation between the Pakistan army and also the Chinese army, or ISI and Chinese PLA. Well, of course, the not only the defense, the arms and the things, but also I think that we need to look at the the officer level, the exchanges in the longer run, because now many Pakistani army's officers are trained in the Chinese National Defense College and in other, the related institutions, and even not only the army officers, but Pakistani police officers are trained in somewhere in the Xinjiang and other parts. So if you look at the longer run, these the officer level exchanges might have quite a big impact, but the Chinese impact on the Pakistan's army as well as police. So that's my observation. Thank you.
Excellent points, and thank you very much, Rohi, for those thoughts. And I'll take this opportunity again to thank each one of you for finding time, joining us, and sharing your thoughts. It's been a really very productive afternoon here in Stockholm. Sun is out, and it's getting pleasant. And hopefully, when we upload this recording and prepare the report, there will be many audience probably sitting over the sun and reading the reports. And I'm sure some of you are writing and probably on this subject. If some of our participants wants to know more about, they could contact the authors directly, or they could write to us and we'll help to try to address their questions. But again, thank you very much. And I also take this opportunity to thank my colleagues in ISDP, Ms. Anna Yermuth, then my center colleagues, Seville and Anne, for all the logistical support for setting this up. And again, we'll stay in touch with all the panelists and participants for our next events. Our next webinar in the series is scheduled for 5th of March. There we are going to discuss about one more corridor under the Belt and Road Initiative, which is not really going anywhere. That is the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar corridor. But again, at a larger level, we'll discuss about China's influence operations in the Bay of Bengal, factoring the BCIM. Again, thank you very much, Elizabeth, Joshua, Professor Behera, Brendan, and Roy for joining us and sharing your thoughts. We'll stay in touch and have a very good afternoon and good week ahead. Thank you very much.